This MIDI keyboard has been out of my collection for far too long, and finally I got to take a look and I was really surprised about what I found. This is a 32 key keyboard, which is kind of an odd form factor. We've got pads, 4 knobs at the top, 4 faders, an actual pitch and mod wheel, which is kind of unique from other controllers in this weight class, an ARP mode, a chord mode, scale mode. They talk to each other. Let's dig in. A big thing everybody wants to know about keyboards like this is like, how's the key quality and how are the pads? Well, I think the key quality is pretty good. I'm just going to show you this range of velocity here. I can be pretty sensitive and pretty light touch and increase, and I feel like I have a lot of control over the keys. For me, that's the marker of how the keys feel. Ultimately, at the end of the day, these mini keys, you're not going to have any kind of weighted key feel. You are going to have just kind of standard synth action keys. And the pads, surprisingly good, not the best I've ever played. I can get a semi-light touch on there, but at my lightest touch, we're not really going to get much. I'm not really bouncing off it and getting a signal like I would some more sensitive pads. But at the end of the day, if I'm just finger drumming, it's fine. Just know you're going to have to put in a little bit more pressure. You can see there, it's like every other one is like not quite coming through. Not the best pads I've ever seen, but not terrible. In terms of connectivity, you've got your USB-B port on the back, which we're kind of moving away from this kind of USB, I think. Everything's USB-C now, but USB-B on the back, full-size sustain port, and then an 1/8" MIDI out jack, which is nice if you've got hardware because you've got a bunch of controls here right on the surface that you could easily map to different hardware or outboard gear. This kind of clicky encoder in the middle is for navigating through menus and things like that, and we've got 4 knobs here at the top that you can select for different functions. We'll get into that in a moment. Some people complain about having like finite knobs that have a beginning and an end stopping point. There's pros and cons to this. Ultimately, especially for performance, non-endless encoders like knobs with actual start and end points are actually better because at any point you can see exactly where your knob is. You don't have to worry about like, oh, where is this encoder in the spectrum of whatever I'm trying to control. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that. Don't think just like endless encoders are always better, because that's not always the case. Many portable mini controllers do not feature pitch and mod wheels. They oftentimes have strips. The Akai MPK Mini has that awful joystick, but the Akai MPK Mini Plus does have actual physical wheels. It's not something I use a ton, but it is kind of a nice luxury to have on a controller this size. Now there's transport controls and DAW functionality. We'll get into that in a moment. First, let's talk about the ARP. It's a pretty basic arpeggiator. I'm going to hold shift and I'm going to adjust the rate for the arpeggiator here. And with the ARP on, if I hold shift and turn these knobs, I get other control like the ARP type, the octave, the gate, and the swing. Crank that swing up. And we can latch the arpeggiator as well. So look, no hands. Before we get into the chord mode, let's turn on scale mode. If I hold shift and scale, we can edit the scale mode, like send it on a different MIDI channel. We can change the root note. So I'm going to select that. Let's change that to something like G. And then if we adjust the scale type, we're in chromatic now. I don't know why it would default to chromatic in a scale mode. I don't need a chromatic mode in the scale mode. The keyboard's already chromatic. But anyway, we should be in G major now. And that F should be F natural, but instead we're hearing an F sharp. And hopefully you can hear those are the same notes. Now in chord mode, we can actually hold shift and select a root note here. So I could select a E, for instance, and that'll give me the chord root E. So now we're playing chords in the key of E, but they are like diatonic to the scale. It's not like they're just playing triads or something, although we are playing triads, but we can change the voicing of the chords. So let's shift over to 7th chords. And then we've got something like root 5th octave. And then we even have inversions, like we've got 3, 5, 1, so the 3rd, the 5th, and then the root on top. It's actually a pretty impressive and useful chord mode. Now there are different DAW and preset settings, so depending on the software you're using, it may have a template just for you to take control of. I use Ableton Live, and I was super impressive by the control I have over Ableton Live with this controller. But first, if you need help making promo material for your releases, if you don't want to bother making a website, you just want one link where people can find your music or anything related to you as an artist, and if you want to get your music onto Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, Instagram Reels, then you should check out DistroKid, the sponsor for today's video. They have affordable options so that you can just pay once per year and release as much music as you want. No need to pay for every release. They've been my distributor since well before they ever sponsored the channel. I've never had any issues, and one of the reasons I stuck with them is because they have a lot of extras for their artists, including being able to make your own promo cards. So every time you have a release coming up, they just give you graphics, or you can generate graphics for your release. And you know that cool video that plays on some of your favorite tracks on Spotify? You can make one of those on DistroKid. And when your music is finally out there, you can build your hyper follow page, which is a one-stop shop for all things related to your music. You can put not only your streaming links on that page, but you can link to videos of performances or music videos. You can link to your merch. All very simple, no need to go build a website or anything, but a one-stop shop link that you can send to everybody and be like, yo, listen to my new music, check out my new video. It's all there in one place. So for me, DistroKid is like a little bit more than just a distributor. There's a lot of other added value in being a DistroKid artist. So if that all sounds good to you, check out my link in the description. You can get 7% off your first year at DistroKid. When you support the sponsor, you support the channel. So now let's talk about Ableton Live Control. And when I tell you I was so surprised by this, pleasantly surprised, I thought I just have to show you. So I'm gonna do a quick demo for you and narrate it so you can see how good this thing actually is with controlling Ableton Live. All right, to start this session, I'm going to hold Shift and Tempo, which turns the metronome on, press play to start the clock. Now quickly, I'm gonna record a clip, get out of DAW mode so I can use the pads for drums, and then press the record button again so I can loop that. Now we will arm the next track, which is our bass, audition the sound a bit, and then let's record it. I used the record button there to start recording this clip, and I'm just gonna tap the clip again to loop it. You can do it both ways. Same exact process here with this key instrument, arm it, press record, start recording our loop. This loop is a little longer, but you're gonna see I'm gonna reach up to that clip button, the red one, launch it, and we'll be fully looping there. Reaching up to the knobs at the top, we're going to tweak the send effects. So currently these are set to controlling send effects. I'm controlling send A, but if I hold shift and press the send pad again, I can control send B, and then so on if you have more. We're recording the next layer, so I've armed another synth, which we're going to loop with the same process. And I'm looping that and stopping the drums at the same time. Now moving the bank over so I can access track 5, which I want to fade in with that fader, but I need to arm it first. So arm that track, then slowly start fading in the sound. Record that. Four bars, and then loop it. I almost pressed the wrong button here, but I want to navigate back over so I can access the drums on track 1 again. We're going to try to come up with a secondary drum loop, just something simple for like a B section. I'm going to audition some drum sounds. I'm playing drums on the keys here because I don't want to switch out of DAW mode and use the pads. So let's record a new drum clip. Stopping other clips. And then we're going to do a scene launch and bring everything back in. And now we're fully in the groove. It's a pretty fun workflow that you don't even have to touch the mouse to do. We're going to do some more tweaking more effects. Dial in that delay. Of course, we have access to our faders where we can bring volumes down and start to fade things out for something of an outro. I didn't show that you can actually use the back button to undo, which can be very useful in the workflow. Though it is a little confusing, sometimes I use the track arrows instead of the bank arrows to try to move the grid around, but as long as you learn not to do that, you should be good to go. So yeah, I was really impressed by how the Oxygen Pro Mini works as a controller for Ableton Live. They did a really great job with this integration. But if you're in the market for MIDI controllers, you probably have a few other options that you're considering. Let's talk through a bit of comparison with some of the more popular options. First off, we've got the Akai MPK Mini. This is like the most popular MIDI controller. It's great quality, fantastic pads, definitely better pads than we have here on the Oxygen Pro Mini. These are MPC pads built into this thing. So if you're thinking a lot about finger drumming, the Akai MPK Mini takes the cake. However, if you're looking for that extended DAW control that we just kind of went through here on the Oxygen Pro Mini, you're not going to get that on the Akai MPK Mini. No DAW controls here. No play, record, none of that. You're not going to have an easy time trying to loop with this controller. Also, no MIDI out, just USB. So while this is a great controller, if you've got aspirations to do a lot of other things, Oxygen Pro Mini wins in terms of features. Another popular entry is the Mini Lab 3. Now, the Mini Lab 3 does have some pretty good Ableton Live control, although we sacrifice having 2 rows of pads for a single row of pads. And that kind of really matters for me as an Ableton user, because as you saw in the demo, we were able to have one scene of clips followed by another scene of clips, which makes it really easy to transition through your song or record another part of a track that's already playing. Here, we've just got one set of pads. We're going to be using that set of pads for transport control. We can launch clips with these pads, and we can also do finger drumming, but I would say even though these pads on the Oxygen Pro Mini are not fantastic, I think they're a slight step above the Arturias here, because I can actually feel these pads a little bit more, while these pads are kind of very stiff and very solid, and it's tough to get a very sensitive sound out of them. Oh, one more quick thing on this. The chord mode on the Oxygen Pro Mini, way better than the chord mode on the Mini Lab 3. You can basically only build up one chord type on the Mini Lab 3. So you can't play like diatonic chords in a scale, which doesn't even make any sense. You can just play like major or minor triads. You can't change between them easily. But you can do that really easily on the Oxygen Pro Mini. That being said, Arturia has a great software suite that when you have a Mini Lab 3 controlling their amazing plugins is just beautifully integrated, being able to do sound design and control different instruments with the Mini Lab 3. I mean, Arturia makes sounds and makes hardware, so they've got a little leg up in that regard. And probably one of its biggest competitors here, the Launchkey Mini Mark IV. Now, this controller is a bit newer than the Oxygen Pro Mini, so maybe it's not totally fair comparison, but what am I talking about? They're MIDI controllers. They don't have feelings. But in terms of Ableton Live control, even though I was really impressed by the Oxygen Pro Mini, I think the Novation Launchkey being really crafted specifically for Ableton Live gives it a slight leg up. To navigate and arm tracks, you're not limited to just this 4 buttons and then moving around the banks. You can just fluidly click through and scroll through different tracks. I've got a whole video on the new Launchkey Minis, as well as the Mini Lab. I did an update video of that too, if you want to see some details on those specifically. The arpeggiator is also really impressive on the Launchkey Mini, where you can do things like mutate and do different patterns with your arpeggiator. And it's also got a step sequencer that works natively with Live. There are other step sequencers out there, but the Launchkey Mini is actually the only step sequencer that works like the step sequencer in Ableton Push does. So that's really cool. However, if Ableton Live is not your thing, if you're not totally into that workflow, there's a lot more workflow presets built into the Oxygen Pro Mini. You've got all these other controls, the faders, the pitch and mod wheels, only strips here on the Launchkey Mini. And though you have less knobs here, they are knobs versus the endless encoders here on the Launchkey Mini, which again, we talked about. There's pros and cons when it comes to that. The pads are bigger on the Oxygen Pro Mini. However, I think the pads are a bit better quality on the Launchkey Mini, even though they're smaller. But you do get 2 rows of them, which again, that's a huge advantage for Ableton Live clip launching. And also, if you have a drum rack, you have the ability to have 16 samples right here, right at your fingertips. You're only going to get 8 right here. And there are of course other MIDI controllers out there. You could go on for days comparing and contrasting different MIDI controllers, different gear, but please let me remind you, if you today just bought one of these keyboards or even a keyboard that I'm not talking about here today, you would be moving forward in your musical journey. There is no perfect MIDI controller. I described pros and cons of each of these four in front of me. The controller is not what is going to create the great music. You are. And it's what you do with the tools that you have that will allow you to establish yourself as an artist, as a producer. So while I wholeheartedly understand your journey out there of trying to get the best value for your dollar in choosing a MIDI controller, getting stuck in that process is not worth the time wasted that you could just be like actually working on and making music. So don't dwell for too long on this decision. Don't spend weeks watching YouTube videos and comparisons or wondering if a new, better MIDI controller is going to come out in the next month. Just make an informed decision based on technical stuff, based on vibes, whatever it is, and start making music. That's going to be all for now. Links to all these controllers will be down in the description. Shopping with those links does help the channel out a lot, as does using the link for DistroKid, who is the sponsor for today's video. Shout out to all the channel members. I will see you all soon. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.